Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 410, and my guests are actor and activist William Baldwin and Dr. Robert Marbut, who has worked on issues of homelessness for more than 3 decades. We'll learn a lot more about Robert in an upcoming episode. Robert and William sat down with me and talked about how the two of them have spent the last year visiting homeless encampments, shelters, and outreach programs. They're part of a huge humanitarian campaign that includes the documentary Americans with No Address that William is the narrator for, a feature film, No Address, starring William and an ensemble cast, a book based on the film, and an interactive study guide to accompany all of it, and it is to educate and provide structure for approaches to engage and, quote, serve individuals who are experiencing homelessness, unquote. I've seen the documentary, and it is incredible. It stunningly well done. What really struck me in the film was that there are outreach programs, private groups, churches, private citizens who are making a huge difference in the homelessness crisis and the fact that so many Americans have no address, as stated in the film title. In San Antonio, there is a program that was featured in the documentary that has been able to drop homelessness by 70%. It works. These programs work, and yet it seems our government is so busy fighting with itself that they're what's really standing in the way of tackling this issue. And it's not a left or right thing, because both sides have foibles, have problems with dealing with this crisis. It's a mental health crisis. It's an addiction crisis. It's a lot of stuff all wrapped up, but it's being dealt with and handled in a really beautiful, lovely, humane, and dare I say Christ-like. I'm going to say it because I think that's fitting, in a way that really, and I don't mean that in a religious sense, I should say. I mean that in an embodiment sense, that it's working. And so when the documentary, I should say, comes out and people can see it, right now it's doing the tour and they showed it up in Washington, D.C. and things like that. When it hits the airwaves for public consumption, I highly recommend it. It's so good. The movie, No Address, won't be out till the end of the year, but the documentary should come out sooner than that. So please, if you can, definitely check that out, and I'll keep you updated when I know to let you know to go find it. Okay, general stuff. I myself am on Patreon under Susan Ruthism. It helps keep this show ad-free. It helps with just the basic creative endeavors that I do. Lots of content. Well, let me rephrase that. It's not lots of content yet. I'm working up to it, but definitely content you won't get in other places on any of my other social media. Check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links and to learn more about my guests and the show. I got a lot of links for this episode, so definitely go to that. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow me on socials under Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast. And if you like music, go find my music. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever you get music, under Susan Ruth. And yeah, rate, review, subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this community. And I appreciate you. So be well, be kind, be love, be compassion. Here we go. William Baldwin and Dr. Robert Marbut, welcome to Hey Human.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Billy, we're going to focus on you for most of this. Robert, you're going to be stats person, I understand. Billy, how I like to start is I ask people where they're from and how their childhood shaped who they are now.
I was born on Long Island in Massapequa, Long Island. I lived most of my life in New York.
went to school in upstate New York, and I lived in New York City and the suburbs, when I met my wife and we had our children. Then I got relocated for work and raised my children in Santa Barbara and commuted to Paramount. And I've been out on the West Coast since 2007, but spent the majority of my life in and around the city, either living in the city or, growing up in the suburbs. And my life was very, very heavily influenced primarily by my parents first, my siblings, my community, and also I would say outside of that, I competed as an athlete, as a wrestler, and I think wrestling from fourth grade through junior high, high school, and college really sort of helped to shape and inform the way I go about pursuing just my philosophy on life. But more importantly than that, certainly my parents. My father was a public educator. He was an activist. He was a high school political science teacher, and he did everything at the school. He coached the football team, the rifle team. He ran the Key Club. He ran the youth council. He ran the winter rec program, the summer recreation program. He was a Little League coach from when my brother Alex started to when Stephen finished, and he was our Cub Scout master from when Alex started to when Stephen finished. So he just was directly and indirectly helping influence and shape and inform the lives of a lot of the members of my community for 35 years.
Like a community father figure.
Yeah, he was a real pillar in our community. He was a real pillar and someone who instilled the value in me, my siblings, and many people in my community of giving back and through in the form of service.
Is he passed away?
He died when I was very young. He died when I was 19, when I was away at college. Yeah.
That's awful. I'm sorry.
And then my mother miraculously lived to be almost 93.
Oh, wow.
She outlived my dad by 40 years. Yeah.
Wow. Clearly, your childhood, you mentioned activism, political science. I think that definitely shapes a child to have that conversation going in the house.
Yeah.
And is that really where you got the initial bug to be an active member of society?
Yeah, I always say I was an activist that happened to become an actor, not the other way around. I wasn't an actor that happened to become an activist. I was an activist when I was 15 years old. I was involved with student government all the way from 6th or 7th grade all the way through graduating. And at Binghamton University, I was a political science major. I fetched coffee and dry cleaning on the Hill for a little stint. And I've been active on various political nonprofit and charitable boards for decades. My mother's breast cancer foundation, Rock the Vote, the Creative Coalition, Help for the Homeless, lots of different organizations I've been involved in. But that was something that was instilled in me, dinner conversations, sitting around the dinner table. I don't remember every night. We always had dinner around the table every night, but I don't always remember PBS and Walter Cronkite being on every night, but we were a family that watched the news, was aware of world affairs and current affairs, and discussed it. I mean, I literally remember discussing when I was, 10 years old, what was going on with Nixon and Watergate around the dinner table with my father.
Do you feel like that's something that you've instilled in your own kids as well as you move forward?
I hope so. I think so. I don't know. Here's the deal. It's in my DNA. I don't know if it's in their DNA the way it's in my DNA. I sort of have a compartmentalized life where I do things with my kids and I don't really talk a lot about my show business career. And I do talk about things that are important to me. But we live in a world where kids are being sort of repelled and turned off by. Look, my kids aren't the kids right now that are watching what's happening and they're aware, but they're not actively going to demonstrations. They have in the past, actually. They've gone to climate change events. They've gone to Black Lives Matter events. They've marched in Santa Barbara in big marches that they've had in Santa Barbara. So they're aware and they've demonstrated. I wouldn't say they have been I was involved with student government from 7th grade through 12th grade. They've never done that. I was a political science major. They were not political science majors. They are aware and they are compassionate. They care. So we'll see where it leads them. My oldest just graduated USC. My middle child is going to be a senior at SC. And my youngest child, who is the dodo bird, was the valedictorian of her school, and she's currently not. She's on her second gap year because she's working and doing great in New York, and she's playing guitar, and she's in studios, and she's recording demos and stuff. So she's very bright. I'm not sure if it's going to wind up with her with like a dual theater and economics degree, or if she's going to go like her mother and go into show business and have a record deal and have 3 songs go to number 1 on the Billboard charts when she's 19 or 20 years old, like her mother did, and her grandmother. Her mother is my wife, Chana Phillips, and her grandmother is Michelle Phillips from the Mamas and Papas. So she comes from a long line. I think that's what's in her DNA.
Yeah, I get that.
But she was valedictorian. I don't know many valedictorians that didn't go on to go to college. Right now, she's one.
As far as the younger generation, I mean, they didn't have a requirement for civics for my nieces and nephews. So I don't know if that's even a part of the curriculum anymore in high school, which is unfortunate because I think that it robs people of, in a way, it robs them of their voice. If they don't know how everything works, how can they speak out against it?
Yeah. My father used to have a class like that called Current Affairs, and one of the assignments every week is that you had to read an article in the New York Times or Newsday on Long Island and clip it and write a 1-page report on it. There was various aspects of what was the article about and what was your opinion on the article, and then you had to present it in class. And my father just required that you didn't clip like the box score from the Yankees Red Sox game the night before and say, yay, we won. We wanted it to be, but he left a broad swath, if you will, of it didn't have to be politics, government, history. It could be on a play. It could be on some sort of other cultural. He loved when they got it, even though it was a civics class, he loved when they got involved. My father used to take bus loads of kids to the theater every year. That's how I wound up getting to see a lot of theater because we could never afford that. We never had a car. We never went on vacation. We never were on a plane. We never ate in restaurants. But I wound up getting a healthy dose of live musical theater because my father would take with a bunch of chaperones kids to see. I saw Shenandoah, The Wiz, Pippin. I saw dozens of shows when I was like 9, 10 years old because my father would take groups of kids, and in exchange for taking 2 busloads of kids, taking 50 or 60 kids, he would palm like 2 or 3 tickets and throw us on the bus with him. And I got to see a lot of musical theater when I was young, 8, 10, 12 years old.
That's so cool. Your dad would have loved Hamilton.
Yes. Yeah.
Did your dad get you into wrestling too, or was that somebody else in your life?
No, it was my best friend's dad.
Okay.
It was my best friend's dad, if you can follow this. My best friend's dad, my dad was a teacher at Massapequa High School. My best friend's dad was a student there. My father was his teacher, not my best friend, my best friend's dad. He graduated in 1957, then graduated from NYU in 1961, went back to his old alma mater high school to become a teacher there. And my father was a civics, history, social studies teacher and football coach. His father was a phys ed teacher and the varsity wrestling coach there for decades. And his dad got me involved in wrestling at a very early age when I was 7 or 8 years old.
I understand you and Robert have a little rivalry between swimming and wrestling as far as Olympic sports.
No, it's pentathlon, and he's just jealous because he can't do 5 different sports. So
put it this way, I
walks around with the slinky shirt, and does this thing on a mat.
I trounced Marbut in this Olympic battle the same way I would trounce Marbut in a wrestling match. Let's leave it at that. Just ask him who's back in the Olympics and who's not in the Olympics, okay? What's the answer to that question, Marbut?
Ask him who got knocked out of the Olympics first and who stayed in.
What a bunch of fools to knock out a sport that had been in the Olympics since 877 years before Christ. Okay, take that to your Trump-supporting evangelicals and tell them you threw a sport out that predates the man himself. See what they say to you. You're gonna get a spanking for that.
Wrestling, that's really what was the big event in the Olympics.
Yes, it was wrestling. Like the 2 founding sports were like discus, were like javelin and wrestling.
That's right.
Nearly 1,000 years before Christ.
Yeah, well, ancient pentathlon, that was the actual where the end of the Olympics ended actually had wrestling as a sub-sport of our sport. So I sent Billy a picture on the wall. I have a thing from Greece that the Greece Olympic team gave me, and it has the 5 ancient sports of then ancient pentathlon. And there's wrestling, one of the 5. Just another sport.
How did pentathlon compete if you didn't have $1 million pony and a champagne flute and a pistol and an ascot? How did that work back then? How did you compete in that sport back then? His sport says tally ho, and my sport says yahoo.
How did you, Billy, get involved with the documentary Americans with No Address and the film No Address? I imagine it immediately spoke to your activism side. Explain how you got drawn into that.
Well, it's just the basic, I got a call from my agent. I was offered the film. Very quick turnaround. They needed me on a plane in like 3 days. And then when I got on the set, I sort of, ingratiated my way into deeper involvement in the project. The documentary, I don't think was originally intended to be honest, truthful, accurate, authentic. They went to 20 cities in 18 states, conducted several hundred interviews. They had thousands of hours of footage that spun off the doc, which we now have called Americans with No Address. They then asked me to do the voiceover for it, which I did. I've seen it now 3 or 4 times. It looks great. And we're just trying to raise awareness and to try to focus attention on this issue. But it happened through the normal casting process. And I think because I like the part and I like the script, I like the team. I had some problems with the script that I sort of warned production about that we've addressed, no pun intended, that we, thank God we did. There was we dealt with that. Yeah, it was the normal casting process, and then they spun off the doc. I did the voiceover, and because of my past, where I studied politics, and I have worked, very, fairly deeply until I became a dad. I worked fairly deeply in politics. I've been involved with Democratic Party politics. I told you I served on various boards. I've attended every RNC and every DNC and run like a shadow convention at the RNC and DNC since 1992. I've attended the DNC since 1988 and both the RNC and the DNC since 92. I've always enjoyed, is maybe not the exact word, but I've always enjoyed reaching over the aisle and working in a bipartisan way. We've had done significant work with Dennis Hastert and Orrin Hatch when it comes to funding for the National Endowment for the Arts and things like that. So, but I have worked with Maria Cuomo's organization, Help for the Homeless. I've worked with Andrew when he was the housing secretary under Clinton, and I slept over homeless facilities in DC and maybe Baltimore, Philly, New York. A couple of times I slept over facilities with Andrew, and I've been engaged. But when I relocated to California in 2007 to do a television show for ABC, all of my political contacts were Albany, New York City, and Washington, and now I was living in Santa Barbara, and I had 3 young children, and I basically told everybody, I didn't say lose my number, but I said, don't call me, I'll call you. I said, I want to focus on parenting and raising my children and supporting my family. Lo and behold, like 15 years went by. I really enjoyed that, but I'm anxious and interested and excited to get back in the game if the planets align. And that's what I mean by that, is if I can do it effectively, if you can do it efficiently, if I can have a real impact, and it's I'm not howling into the
void.
I'm not screaming into a hurricane.
Yeah,
into the void.
I watched the documentary in LA and with all of you, and it's quite moving. And the beauty of this film, to me, of this documentary, is that it doesn't feel gratuitous.
Yeah.
It felt like you all really, and for the listeners, basically, they went to encampments, they went to various shelters and community outreach programs, and really, really on the ground and getting to know people, talking to people who are unhomed. And it was really beautifully done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really said in this documentary is this could happen to anyone. And it's not that many steps in order to find yourself in that situation. And I think there's a fear and a distance that happens in the human psyche that says, oh, if I engage this, or if I think about this, or if I look at this, I'm looking at the potential of myself, and it really shuts people off. So I think that the fact that you all were really there and in it and talking to people is so wonderful. How did it shape you as you went through that process?
Well, one of the things what's so cool about Billy, literally the first day before, well, I guess it was, we were set to shoot on Monday. And when everybody came, not everybody, but about half the cast came in on Saturday, a couple of days in advance. And we spent the first couple of days just touring homeless encampments, and we were shooting in Sacramento. And at that time, the longest encampment in America was actually in Sacramento. So we spent a lot of time there and in some other encampments. And I always remember Billy, and it's funny because Billy and I have literally gone against each other in sport. We've been at the same meetings. We've been, over 40 years, just in and out on different sides, never on the same side. And Billy came over to me, he said, if we're just doing this for a sort of a tutti frutti drive-by, picture that's unmeaningful, I don't want to be involved.
Yeah, photo op.
But if this is a serious effort, I'm all in. And then he goes, so what's it, Buster? I mean, and literally that's our first 30 minutes together. And 2 hours later, Billy and I had sort of escaped our security team in the film. We had gone way to an end and come into this couple who invited us to breakfast at 10:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And that was when Billy and I, and we started communicating through just eye looks. That was when we realized we had something different going on here. And we just, even though we disagree in so many different other areas, we actually find a lot of common ground in most areas. And that if you get raised sort of the fringe, that we could start working together. And so little of that's happening in the country now. And so hopefully, we can show, here we are working together very far apart in a lot of ways, but we're finding ways to agree. We're finding common ground.
Well, there isn't really a political, it's a human problem. It's a human issue. It's not a right or left or up or down. And I think that unfortunately politics tries to make it one or the other, and the human beings get lost in that fight because then it stops being about them and it's all about the fight up here.
We talked about this today at breakfast. On one side, there's a group who doesn't want to fund this, and some of the extremists, maybe within my side of the aisle, at times have said, we don't need to fund this. They just chose to become homeless. So why are we going to fund it? Well, and the reality is most of the time, nobody chose to become experiencing homelessness. And if we don't spend money now, it's going to be way more expensive later in terms of EMS, fire, police, hospitals, emergency rooms, loss of downtowns. And then on the other side of the aisle, Billy's side of the aisle, he has some people to his extreme that do not want to have treatment, do not want to have sort of accountability and programming. And what I know with metaphysical certainty after doing this a long time, you don't get recovery hanging out on a bench or under a bench or on a beach or in a cul-de-sac. Likewise, you don't get recovery in jail cell floor. You don't get recovery by being arrested, but you don't get recovery just hanging out on a street either. And Billy and I have been now in multiple states and multiple encampments. We saw one a week ago or so, a couple weeks ago, I guess, up in Seattle of a person who was dying right in front of us. And everybody was trying to get this guy treatment. And, Billy, maybe you want to share that story, because that's anybody who saw that story would come to the conclusion that our system now, our legal system in particular, is totally, completely broke.
Yeah, I think, what Marbut is saying is that I just will just reiterate a little bit of what he just said. the right is hesitant to fund it. The left is hesitant to force it, not enforce it, but to force it. I believe it needs the funding. It'll be cheaper to address it than it'll be far more costly if we don't spend the money. We need money primarily in mental health care. There was 500,000 national beds in the 1950s. There's less than 20,000 today. This is not an epidemic or a crisis of homelessness. It's a crisis of mental health. It's also less of a crisis of drug addiction than people think. People think that's the choice, but that's untreated mental health problems. People that have anxiety, that have depression, that have bipolar, that have schizophrenia, don't have health care. They're not seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist, not getting prescribed the proper medication. So they're self-medicating with street drugs, meth, pot, alcohol, of course, heroin, and primarily fentanyl now. And that's medicating a mental health problem. So part of it, a big part of it is mental health, and a big part of the addiction problem is mental health. So we have to get the medical health care funds back in place. And on my side, the two things that I think Marbut is suggesting, which I agree with, is that this harm reduction policy where you're allowing people you're giving them pipes and you're giving them needles, and you're not requiring them a path to recovery, a path to sobriety, stability, independence, a job. I think there has to be strings attached. I think harm reduction or no harm policies are not working and need to be addressed, number one.
And they're incredibly expensive.
Yeah, they're not working. That's not the way I would want to raise my child, is to just say, just stay in your bedroom and keep getting high and tell me, come out when you want to eat and come out when you want to have a conversation. So, I think I don't know enough about it. So I'm speaking from, this is the actor talking, not the expert in the field, but I've learned a lot about it over the last 2 years that I've been involved with this film. And harm reduction is not working, but also and this is pretty radical for someone like me to say, but I don't think that, and I'm not sure, I've done conservatorships over people, and I'm not sure if it's a 5150 I'm talking about, but we saw a guy overdosing on the street, 22-year-old kid. His name was Blessing. He was convulsing. He was foaming at the mouth. And we had fire department, police department, several people from nonprofit organizations, and they barely got him coherent enough for him to simply utter the words, "I decline treatment." Like, I don't want to be taken away on the stretcher by the fire department and taken to the emergency room. And the primary reason he was saying that, and I didn't realize it at the time, the fire department and the cops and Marbut and the nonprofits were all telling me, is because when they give him Narcan, he won't be high anymore. And the way he'll feel when he's not high is so terrifying to him. That's why he was rejecting treatment. I don't think it should be a judge in a courtroom 3 weeks later making the decision. I think if you have a cop, a fireman, a first responder, a paramedic, a social worker, and any two of those people say, take him, then he should be put into a 72-hour lockdown, possibly against his will, and let this person make a decision on his future regarding all of it: addiction, homelessness, all of it, a job, education, all of it. Because it's all, if you agree to the treatment, you're on a path to recovery, you're on a path back to independence. So I don't know if this should be a situation where you go in with lawyers and a judge decides this. I think if you have a social worker and a fireman and a paramedic, and they'll say, because the term when I've done a conservatorship is, if they are a threat of a harm to themselves or others, or they are a harm to themselves or others, then you have the right to, you can take their rights away. Clearly, this kid, Blessing, was clearly not only a potential, he was harming himself. He was not a potential harm to himself. He was harming himself, and he was clearly a potential harm to others. I'm not doing it to clean up the sidewalks in front of the Nike store, in front of Starbucks, so they, the patrons don't have to be bothered stepping over them when they come in and out of the door. I could care less about that. I care about the life and the health and well-being of this person. And he was not in a position to make that decision for himself. He was not. He was not of clear mind at all. I mean, I've seen people high on booze. I've seen people high on cocaine. I've seen people high on heroin. I've seen people high on oxy. Fentanyl is a totally different ball of wax. It's a totally different. Take all of that together and multiply it by 10, and that's what you're dealing with. These people are not in a position to know how to make a reasoned judgment on that. So I wouldn't mind putting it in the hands of people that are experts in the field, more so than any judge, a social worker on the streets, a fireman, a paramedic, a cop. Instead, they left them there. The cops walked by me and said, "This is what we do. This is how we're dealing with it." You know.
It was the most amazing thing how society showed up for blessing. I mean, if you think of it as sort of a societal response, we had 4 firefighters, 3 of who were EMS trained. We had 2 county sheriffs there. We had 3 different Seattle city agencies that had multiple people there. There was a nonprofit group that had 4 people there. Plus, you had Billy and I. Every one of us thought this guy needs help now, because he may not be alive as we tape this. He may not be with us anymore. He was that far gone. And he's the one person on that street corner who was had the least ability to make a coherent decision. But the way our laws are written, that you basically are giving it to a judge 3 weeks later rather than the people on the spot. And I get there were bad things done in the past, but that doesn't mean you throw out the whole program. We had a situation where, again, one side of the aisle didn't want to fund mental health. And then the other extreme on the mental health, and it almost, by the way, breaks in the same political groups we have here, who were watching When It Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, thought it was a documentary, and moved into deinstitutionalization. And so you had this really strange, unholy alliance.
Those are the Reagan years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people trying to unfund on one side and deinstitutional on the other. And you wonder, well, why do we now have more people in jail than ever before? Why do we have more people on the street than ever before? And when you take away treatment from the equation, and then you add something so powerful as fentanyl, I'm not surprised at all what's happened at downtown Portland, downtown Seattle. As you know, San Francisco, in my book, is almost a lost city. And I know others may differ, but unless we make some radical changes, we're just going to, it's going to be not getting those cities better. It's going to be now Atlanta, Chicago,
Right.
Dallas, New Orleans are going to become just like those cities.
Yeah. The thing that really struck me too is that it's not like there aren't programs that do work. The San Antonio statistic, where 70% of the people that are experiencing homelessness was eradicated and they got their life back together, and that you have shown in this documentary and by going from town to town that the public citizens who step up in the churches and the people that say, no, we can make a difference, and then they do make a difference. I don't understand the disconnect. And that's maybe I'm being Pollyannic about how the government works, but it seems like if I'm in the government and I say, oh, here are these cities that they have programs running by private citizens and privately funded and nonprofits, that it works, why am I not looking at that as the model for the whole country?
Yeah, that should be replicated across the country. It should be federal, state, and local government. It should be nonprofits. It should be faith-based organizations, and it should be corporate America. We can go in and replicate this. A significant amount of homelessness takes place in counties where there's 800, 1,000, 1,200 people in the county that are homeless. And you could probably have strike teams go in there and implement these programs and reduce that, like Marbut has done, 70, 80% in these areas where it's a little bit more manageable, rather than going into Sacramento, where it went from 2,000 or 3,000 to 12,000 or 14,000 over the last 5 years. I think COVID was a major contributor to that. But also what's a big contributor to it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marbut, but the reason there's a homeless problem in California, a big problem with homelessness in California, is because California is California. It's an amazing, amazing place. Okay. We also have Greyhound diplomacy, where they give you $300 in a Greyhound ticket in Cincinnati or Akron or Toledo and say, do you want to wake up on the beach in Venice tomorrow with $300 in your pocket? And they have way better services there in LA and in San Francisco than we do here. They'll provide you with way better services. So the reason there's so many homeless people in California is because the services in California, because of our left-leaning, bleeding heart liberal tendencies, is to look out and take care of these people when we provide amazing services, and that's part of why the people come. California is amazing. There's Greyhound diplomacy, and the services are better than, probably better than anywhere in the country. There's other states that have good services, but California's are probably the best, most comprehensive.
And I'd add one thing there. California also has the least amount of accountability for an individual. They don't require treatment. They don't require you to go meet with the case manager. That more than any other state, it's the most liberalized. We give you all this stuff and there's no strings. We give all this stuff. There's no accountability.
I wouldn't even call that liberalized. I would call that like nonsensical. When something is not working or something was working and now the numbers have dropped precipitously, like, let's look at it and let's course correct. Let's tack east. Let's try something different. Let's try something new. Right now, what you guys are doing in Arkansas, what you're doing in San Antonio, what you're doing in Pinellas, what the Cuomos have done in New York, which was easy to get consensus because they were specifically targeting veteran homelessness. So they were able to reduce veteran homelessness by 70, 80% over the course of a 4 or 5 year period. If we can go into suburban areas where you have 600, 800, 1,000 homeless people in suburban communities outside of Chicago, outside of Boston, outside of Baltimore, we could reduce the numbers by, forget 70, 80%. If we could reduce the numbers by 30 or 40%, that's a great start. It's a great start.
If you stop the growth in the West Coast, if you just stop the growth, most people would go, wow, look at what we changed. And this problem has gotten so bad, it is a direct threat to our country and many of our communities, and it's only going to get worse. We're now doubling. Street level homeless is now doubling every 5 to 6 years. And unless we all, man the battle stations, and I mean everybody, faith-based, nonprofit, secular, government, state, local. One of our examples we use in our movie, which I just love, is Johns Hopkins University, a secular university, setting up a mental health, behavioral health, and substance use clinic inside a Christian rescue mission. And if they could pull that off and do so well, and why should the government be saying, well, we don't like those type of programs, we don't like it that way. That may not be the only way, and not everybody responds to that. But if you're getting that good of success, why shouldn't we be encouraging much more of that rather than saying we can't do it and can't do it this way? We need everybody's help now, not telling people you can't help.
Yeah.
Marbut says, a lot of people who are, I wouldn't say lacking compassion maybe, but sort of desensitized to this are saying that people made this choice in their life. We have 1.3 million adults and 1.5 million children homeless. 1.5 million children, none of them made the choice to be homeless. Of the 1.3 million, which the numbers are probably skewed lower than it is in reality, especially coming out of COVID. But of the 1.3 million, how many of those mentally ill made that choice? How many children that aged out of foster care and became homeless made that choice? How many PTSD veterans that were not taken care of made that choice? How many people that are addicted to drugs that are self-medicating a mental health crisis made that choice? Are there people that made the choice instead? Because, you do go into these encampments and they say, I'd rather stay in the encampment than go to a facility because for whatever reason, I don't feel safe. Because remember, in the old days, they'd have a facility where it was a big open air room and they had men and women staying together and the women had a child with them and they didn't feel safe for their child. They thought they might be attacked. They thought they might be raped. So people literally would choose to not be put up in a facility. That's changed now. We have facilities that have a men's corridor, a women's corridor, a family corridor, people that are working on sobriety, people that are in a holding pattern and hoping to graduate to get into detox. If you're talking about let's say rounded off to 3 million people, half of them are children, and the other half that are adults, 90% of them did not make a choice. It's a huge mental health crisis that needs to be addressed, and it's going to be a lot cheaper to address it than if we don't address it. If you look at what Marbut's talking about in terms of quality of life, the impact on cost of living, real estate value, incarceration, drug addiction, crime, it's far more expensive to not give these people treatment than it is to give them the treatment. People say, how are we going to fund it? It's cheaper to fund it than not fund it. And we're paying the price for it now.
The stat for funding the methadone type way of accommodating was something like $250,000. Was it a day? Was that correct?
Yeah, from the documentary, yeah.
That was a stat in San Francisco where they're spending over $250,000 a day to clean the streets up. Not treatment, not recovery. That's just how much they're paying to pick up what's going on. It's crazy. That money should be going to treatment and recovery, not mitigating the damage being done. It's going to be so cheaper to do this right than to spend money wastefully doing it wrong. And we have to do some investment to get this. And in the long run, it will save money. It will save money if we make an investment, and it will save money if we course correct our policies. I like the way Billy says that. Some of what we're doing is working. We know how to do this right around the country.
Clearly.
That's the back half of the movie, is to show places that have had huge reductions and sustained it. But they don't buy into crazy on either side, to be honest. Most of it is common sense, middle, the way you would want to work with your family members in many ways.
That's why I was saying after I walked out of I left the movie, I was really moved by it. As I said, everyone, I don't know when it actually launches for the human out there consumption, but I know it's coming soon. But the first thing I thought of is every single person on the Hill, all the way up to the White House, needs to watch this film.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite parts of it was that housing complex in Austin, Texas, where they were on the 40 or 50 acres, and they were going to expand another 50 acres. And they had those beautiful little cul-de-sacs and those mobile homes all facing each other. They said strategically, there's no back door. Like you got to come out, which I don't know if that's an insurance liability or a fire hazard or not, but hopefully they have an escape route in case they can't get out the front door.
But Billy's putting his backdraft hat on here. It is 2 months of fire academy in Chicago here.
Yeah, I love the facility there. They were all different. They weren't all cookie cutter. They were all different colors. They were all different people, and there were strings attached. There was accountability. You can't be put in there and do whatever the heck you want. There's accountability in terms of conduct and behavior, and that community looked absolutely pristine. I go to homeless encampments, and I've been going to them with Marbut quite a bit. We left blessing. Once he said, I refuse treatment, and the fire department looked at each other and they said, did you hear that? And you go, yeah. And they go, okay, sorry, guys. And they got on the rig and they drove away. We then left and we went to various other facilities. And one place we went to was on 12th and Jackson in Seattle. And we were in like a fentanyl gallery, and we were hanging out with probably 30 or 40 people from 17 to 75. One older guy was in a wheelchair with his leg amputated, and he couldn't even get across the street, and he was falling out of his wheelchair. People were doing the classic, fentanyl lean. There was this one very articulate, 22 years old, very handsome, very articulate, very intelligent guy who, this kid needs help because this is the kind of kid that you could absolutely snatch and save. And this kid could go on to have a super, very, very successful and productive life. And he could be a great outcome if we could just get him away from the fentanyl and into proper treatment. And then we went to this other place called the White House. And what I couldn't believe about 12th and Jackson and the White House was how absolutely, and the 7-mile stretch in Sacramento, I just could not believe. And I think that's, again, a reflection of the mental health component of it, but I just couldn't believe the filth and the hoarding that was going on. One guy was repairing bicycles, so I understood why he had 50 or 60 bicycle tires outside of this thing that he built called the White House. But mixed in with all the tires was literally trash and debris, and like he was collecting shopping carts of stuff and just dumping it in front of his own house. And, it just heartbreaking to see, and just hopefully people seeing this will inspire and motivate people to reach out and start to help them,
The hoarding reminds me of the people that went through the Great Depression. And for those of us with parents or grandparents of that age, that we see them with, washing their paper plates and getting things and filling their houses up with stuff because they went through a period of time when they had literally nothing. And I think that when the cities come through and they clean up a homeless encampment, they're taking away literally everything a person owns on the face of the earth.
All of their possessions.
Yeah. And I think about blessing also. It's such a tragedy to think of. I think what is that person's future? Like maybe they have the cure for cancer. Maybe they're going to write the most beautiful sonnet that anyone's ever heard. Maybe they're going to, have a kid that figures out how to solve some other crisis, but we'll never know because we lose these people over and over and over again. And I think it does too create this, how am I ever going to feel good about myself again or have self-worth? And maybe I don't deserve to have things, or maybe, if society keeps looking at me like I'm a piece of shit, how am I supposed to feel good about myself? And that all ties in as well. We have to start seeing people as just human being, period, end of story.
And I think one of the saddest things in most parts of the country today, not everywhere, not San Antonio, not Pinellas, not Community First Village that Billy was talking about up in Austin, but in most parts of the country, the number way you exit homeless now is dying. That's what our country has gotten to, that you don't exit through recovery and treatment in America. In most part of America, you die. The other crazy thing that's going on is the number one supplier of mental health services in America is occurring in jails and prisons. And we all know that doesn't work. I'm not saying that's good treatment. I'm not saying it works well. But the fact that's the number one location of attempted behavioral and mental health, rather than a real robust program that's good. When you think about those two factors, just facts, I mean, this is not a right-wing, left-wing, Republican, Democrat, this is just fact. And how could you have a society that says, if people were shooting themselves, literally with the gun on the street, if Blessing had a gun on his street, something would have been done for that person. But instead he's shooting in an arm, or, smoking a straw, or whatever, he may have eaten pills. There's 4 different ways you can take fentanyl now. So, and at $3 a hit now. So I don't know how he personally was taking, but we would do it for other things. So why aren't we doing it now? It's just mind-boggling how we've gotten to this point. But the good news is there is a path to get this fixed.
It's clear that there are ways to make a difference and to start rectifying this problem. It's been done. It's been proven. There are cities that have shown it to work, that do it on their own. So what's your next step? How are you going to get people in the political arena to pay attention and to step up?
I'm on my way to a screening in Washington, D.C. right now, screening to a bunch of staffers so that we can do exactly that, raise awareness. This is how we're doing it. We're rolling out the doc. We're platforming the release of the film. And hopefully, we'll raise awareness and we'll get enough attention on this to try and implement what Marbut and others are doing in areas of the country where it's working. And we'll do a couple pilot programs in areas where they're not employing similar philosophies and services. And, one success story at a time. I was at a screening and there was a gentleman there who was, used to run the city council. He was a little bit older, probably in his early to mid 80s. And he was the head of the city council. What was that gentleman's name in Seattle? Dr. Marbut, that was the moderator for our panel in Seattle.
Up at Discovery Institute, Bruce Chapman, and he was formerly on city council.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful guy. And at the end of this, he was saying, I implore you to call your congressional representatives and your political leaders or write them letters. And I cut him off and I was like, no, we should take this to them. We should get a bipartisan committee with a bunch of big, heavy hitters that care about this issue in the corporate sector, in the celebrity sector, in the nonprofit sector. And I've had great success. I've literally sat down with Denny Hastert and Orrin Hatch and many other, when I had, I'm not saying we'll do this with it. We're talking about government funding of the arts and arts advocacy and First Amendment rights. And I had, Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins, Julia Roberts with me, and I had other experts in the field. If you put together the right team and you target the right people in positions of power on the right committees, you're going to be able to, we'll be able to move this forward. We'll be able to move the needle for sure.
Amen to that. I really appreciate your time, both of you gentlemen. I don't know if you have a set date yet for the documentary coming out or the film coming out. Has that been chosen for everyone to be able to see?
The film's targeting late September sometime. They haven't locked the film yet. They're still in post with music right now. They haven't locked it. They're color correcting and stuff. So it locks in early June, and they're hoping to release it in late September. The doc, I'm not sure. Marbut, what's going on there?
Similar, late summer, early fall.
Okay, great. And I'll put links on heyhumanpodcast.com so everyone can keep track. There's the documentary, there's the movie, there's a reference guide, is that correct? And a book?
Yeah, Small Communities Study Guide.
Everyone who's listening, you too can make a difference. You can go volunteer. You can get educated on this because it does affect you. It affects all of us. This is the community of human life, and we need to lift it up so that we don't keep losing our blessings. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, the film is No Address. The documentary is Americans with No Address. And yes, I suggest all of your listeners go on the internet and look at the services that are being provided in their local communities, and go to the Salvation Army, go to the local mission, and try to be of service, try to give some time, try to learn more, and try to strategize with other members of your community to help eradicate homelessness.
And if anybody wants further information, No Address Movie, you just type that in on any search engine, it will come up, and there are a lot of ways you can click on and get involved.
Yeah, and I'll put those links on Hey Human Podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.